everyone. Welcome. It's the 7th of August, 2025. And a lot of folks on the Patreon feed this morning are very upset and or confused about the latest announcement concerning the FBI and the Texas Democrats, which is a story that we've been following here this entire week. We also have to talk about the insanity of a press conference yesterday in the Oval Office and how the cancellation of a very critical meeting concerning the Epstein scandal unfolded. So, and many, many other things to talk about today. So welcome. For those of you who are new, I'm Elizabeth Cronise McLaughlin. I was a Wall Street lawyer specializing in white collar civil litigation and human rights law for about 15 years. And now, in addition to doing this, I work with people who are trying to build out an impact for good all over the country. Today, for our visually challenged viewers, I'm wearing a white button-down shirt. My hair is pulled back. I'm a pink-skinned, green-eyed, dirty, blonde-haired woman, and I am in front of my bookshelf in my yellow utility cart. And I'm coming to you, as always, from occupied Muncie, Lenape, and Mohican land. Okay, so this morning, Senator John Cornyn, Republican from Texas, announced that he had gotten the FBI. I'm laughing because, you know, it's horrifying. And that's my way of coping. He announced that he had gotten the FBI to agree to track down the Texas state Democrats who fled the state so that there wouldn't be a quorum in the Texas State House sufficient to gerrymander Texas so that essentially no Democrat can get elected to the House of Representatives. Those Texas state Democrats have fled, as we discussed yesterday, to Illinois, Massachusetts, and New York. We kind of know where they are. Like, we may not know their exact location, but they've been holding press briefings and the like from the places where they've fled. And as I talked about yesterday, the Texas state GOP has issued civil arrest warrants, which are essentially the equivalent of subpoenas, because there is no allegation. This is really important. No allegation that the Texas state Democrats who left the state have committed any crime. Okay. There's no criminal activity involved. There's not even really like a civil law violation. This is more akin to a subpoena that says, we are instructing you that you have to appear in the Texas State House. Okay. The FBI, of course, has nationwide jurisdiction, unlike the Texas law enforcement forces, which are not allowed to enforce the law beyond the boundaries of the state. So Cornyn gets the FBI involved to try to track down these Texas state Democrats. But the problem is the FBI doesn't have any pending warrants. It can't actually compel the Texas state Democrats to return to the state of Texas. So there are very big questions about what exactly the FBI is going to do, right? Other than say, oh, look, we've located a Texas state Democrat staying like down the street from Governor Pritzker in Chicago or something like that, right? They cannot like forcibly arrest them and return them to the state. So what this appears to be is something akin to an authoritarian show of force. And it's essentially designed to try to intimidate Texas state Democrats into returning to the state and thereby allowing the Texas GOP to fundamentally engineer conditions under which the House of Representatives will not flip blue in 2026. So this is really serious stuff because essentially now the FBI has been weaponized to try to get recreate conditions in which Texas, through the exercise of the Texas state GOP, will create conditions that will make it very, very difficult for Dems to win back the House, because essentially they're creating 5 new Republican House of Representative seats through this unlawful gerrymandering effort. All right. All that said, the thing that we should all be aware of here is that, of course, we've had a number of lines crossed recently about the use of federal law enforcement in ways that are not exactly cool, right? We had Marines deployed against U.S. citizens in Los Angeles. We had the National Guard called up by the president without consulting with the governor, not allowed. We had litigation about that, right? And now we have a situation where a senator from Texas has gotten the FBI, which, by the way, needs to be using its resources in lots of other ways other than tracking down Texas state Democrats who are fundamentally doing their job. He's now gotten the FBI weaponized against Democrats who are not doing what he likes. And again, this kind of action is another Rubicon crossed in furtherance of fascist authoritarianism. Now, all that said, I have to ask a question. Where is this going to lead? Because if the FBI can't arrest them because they haven't committed any crime, doesn't have the authority to kind of like pick them up and return them to the state of Texas, is this really going to amount to anything other than, say, like a threat? To which I would expect the Texas state Democrats are going to be like, so we'll have to see where this goes. But, you know, I also don't want anybody, there's two things going on here. One is that, yes, it's another step toward fascist authoritarianism. And second, that it has no teeth, right? So the two things together have to be balanced in the way in which you analyze what's happening with all of this. And it is very, very important. I mean, and this is one reason I know why you all come here every day, but it's very, very important to understand what's actually going on here so that you aren't unnecessarily terrified. And that kind of brings me to one thing that I just want to mention very briefly today, which has been an ongoing theme here on the broadcast for the last few weeks, which is this. Fundamentally, nobody knows exactly what's going to happen going forward, right? Nobody knows at this point what's going to happen around the 2026 election. And there's lots of people out there right now doomsaying, like people putting up whole podcasts, including people that I respect, putting up whole podcasts saying like, oh, Trump's going to declare martial law and there's not going to be a 2026 election. Okay. First of all, I went and did all this research this morning because a question related to this came up on the Patreon feed. And I dove into kind of like all of these summaries written by the Brennan Center for Justice about quote unquote martial law, which doesn't really exist in the United States. We've talked about this before. You know, ways in which Trump could do certain things, but doesn't have the authority to do others, and what would likely happen in a court challenge and what Supreme Court cases would apply in that sort of situation. And frankly, I'm just going to say this. I find it kind of irresponsible at this point to be running around more than a year, like well more than a year before the 2026 midterms, claiming to have a crystal ball that predicts that it's possible that Trump's going to declare martial law. Like, for all we know, Trump's not going to be the president by the time we get to 2026 elections, right? Does everybody understand that? Like, there's a whole series of things that could happen in the interim around the Epstein scandal, more on that in a minute, around kind of these weirdly sort of secret on again, off again meetings that JD Vance is having. Nobody knows exactly what's going to happen down the road. And so one of the things that I just want people to be very mindful of here, okay, is that this is a really good moment to be very aware of the reactions that you have to things that you are reading. Because if what you're reading or you're watching causes you to really like have a panicked and terrified reaction to something that hasn't happened, nobody knows is going to happen, and, you know, like all sorts of intervening events could stop, I would strongly urge you to like log out. And that's no criticism on the content creators who are like trying to serve their audiences, but simultaneously, we've had a lot of conversations here recently about clickbait and engagement farming on the left and the way in which like scaring people keeps them coming back. And so one of the things that I just want people to be worried about here is the way in which your fear and your central nervous system is being hijacked for profit all across the content creation industry right now. And to ask yourself whether or not that's really good in the context of like trying to move the needle for change and for positive outcomes. All right. Because again, as we have already seen, there have been plenty of times in the last 6 months where people are like, he's about to declare martial law, right? And it hasn't happened. Right? We haven't had an Insurrection Act invocation. Yes, we've had some things that were really like not okay, like, you know, deploying the Marines to Los Angeles. And that also went off like poof in like a poof of smoke, because actually there were fundamentally no confrontations between Marines and protesters in LA, right? So we have to take all of this in the context of the fact that they are trying to achieve compliance in advance. And one of the ways that they achieve compliance in advance is by scaring people and, you know, unfortunately, sometimes getting left-leaning content creators to spin this out about things that may never come to pass, that they definitely don't have the authority to do, first of all, and that second of all, may never feasibly come to pass. So, you know, I want everybody to kind of like take a pause on this stuff, because already I'm seeing people ask me questions of like, you know, is Trump going to shut down the 2026 elections? I'm just going to tell you this right now. No. Okay. And I know that, occasionally I've been wrong in the past, but I fundamentally don't see that happening. And I think the fact that we sit here 15 months out from that with people already spinning out terrifying possibilities in that regard is kind of unethical. So I really urge you guys to just stay present to what's happening, because that's what really needs your attention. But what needs your attention more than that in the present moment is trying to do good where you live. Okay. So speaking of things that Trump doesn't have the authority to do, this morning, he posted on Truth Social that he is ordering the Department of Commerce to redo the census. Okay, you guys, basic constitutional principle. In the explicit terminology of the Constitution of the United States, the census can only be administered once a decade. Once a decade, every 10 years. The president does not have the authority willy-nilly in the middle of August in 2025 rather, to just randomly decide that he's going to redo the census because he thinks it was unfair, because too many Democrats turned out to live in certain places, or he thinks there's undocumented people being counted. I mean, and the only reason to do this, I have to point this out, the reason why this is happening, this is another thing to just be aware of, is that redistricting is based on the census. So they're reading in the writing on the wall, as we have discussed a multitude of times this week already, that they can't win in 2026 unless they cheat. Okay. And so what he's trying to do here is do an end run around an explicit provision of the Constitution. There's no negotiation with this, right? It's written in stone in the Constitution. The census happens once every 10 years, not randomly in the middle of August in the 5th year of 10. So the thing to keep in mind here is that, there are a lot of empty threats being thrown around. And again, I have to point out that the empty threats are quite often, at this moment, I don't say this very often, either one of two things, okay? They are either a distraction from Epstein, or they are an attempt to steal a future election because they know they can't win unless they cheat. In this instance, it's both. And I'm just going to say one other thing. If Trump tries to actually rerun the census, there's some effort by the Commerce Department to kind of run this again, it will be stopped by the courts. 100%. Even the Supreme Court. I mean, this is not one of those situations where there's any wiggle room, right? The Supreme Court can't look at the Constitution and be like, yeah, sure, 5.5 years in. That's not going to happen. Okay. And so for this one, all right, again, not a reason to panic, but also you should read it for what it is, which is yet another signal that they know that they're losing. His poll numbers are way underwater. ICE is having a hell of a time. Literally cannot recruit people. They raised the age range, right? So that Dean Cain could become an ICE. I mean, again, this one blows my mind, but Dean Cain, who played Superman, right? Out there helping the little guy, making sure that people don't get hurt. Wanted so badly to round up brown people and deport them that he's volunteered to be an ICE officer, but they had to raise the age limit in order for him to be able to do it. They don't have people. They don't have enough people to get it done because nobody wants to be deporting grandmothers. So, they know that they are losing. There's not going to be a new census, by the way. Oh my goodness. I just realized something here. I left on my all comments thing here. Hold on, you guys. I am going to go into my settings here and make sure we are members only, because I just saw that we have people commenting who are not members of this channel, which means I have to monitor you guys and make sure there's no trolls. Okay. Members only status on. All right. So, one of the things that I want people to kind of be very mindful about here, okay, is that in the context of where they sit vis-a-vis the 2026 election, they know that there is a very serious risk that they're going to lose the House of Representatives, at least. Okay. And if they lose the House of Representatives, not only is Trump's entire agenda stopped in its tracks, but also we regain control of every committee, which means that investigations can begin immediately. He can be impeached. He might not be removed from office in the Senate because that requires 2/3 majority, but he can be impeached. The House can be tied up in impeachment investigations for 2 years, right? Oversight can happen over ICE facilities and corruption and a Qatari jet, right? They don't want any of that. And so, the thing to remember here through this lens is that sometimes what they're doing is signaling their own weakness. And sometimes what they're doing is a massive distraction. And in this instance, as I said, I think it's both. So let's just talk about Epstein for a minute, because I have to remind you guys again, this is not going away. Like, it's not going away. There's literally, it's sticking. It is like stuck to Donald Trump like glue. All right. So yesterday in the Oval Office, there was a press briefing in which Donald Trump claimed that somehow we were all from Wall Street. Like, again, I have to point out his mental acuity is not very sharp these days. But in addition to that, he was asked about this planned meeting that had been reported on at that point for like 36 hours between J.D. Vance, Pam Bondi, Kash Patel, and a number of other senior people in the administration about how to deal with the Epstein thing. Okay. Again, I have to point out, you don't have a meeting like this if you're planning to release the files. So this is all part of like an ongoing cover-up. Okay. So Donald Trump was asked about this in the Oval Office yesterday, and he goes, I don't know anything about that. You should ask J.D. Vance. He's right over there. And J.D. Vance says, it's all fake news. That meeting was never planned. It's not going to happen, right? But Donald Trump is like, what meeting? What meeting was that? What meeting? Okay. And then whoever it was who leaked that the meeting was planned in the first place, then leaked last night to the New York Times again that the meeting had been canceled because J.D. Vance didn't want anybody knowing about it. So they planned a meeting to further the cover-up. Press found out about it. They claimed the meeting wasn't happening and never was supposed to happen. And then they canceled the meeting, and then that got leaked, which is like so classic, so classically a Trump administration kind of scenario. So I just want to flag one thing about this, though, because this is kind of an interesting thing. The reporting on this purported meeting raised the specter of something slightly different. And I don't want to get anybody's hopes up here, but there was some additional reporting last night about the fact that this meeting with J.D. Vance was going to include other members of the cabinet, okay? And of course, the Attorney General is a member of the cabinet, right? We know all of that. Like, that's a given, okay? But other cabinet members were supposed to have been present. Okay, so what does this maybe kind of in like speculation land potentially raise the possibility of? Well, I'm almost hesitant to say this because I do not want anybody to get their hopes up, but I'm going to remind you all that the 25th Amendment of the Constitution of the United States requires the vice president, and essentially what's assumed to be, because the language is a little bit vague, a majority of the cabinet to decide that the president of the United States is no longer fit to serve. And then there's a procedure that rolls out from there. Now, the fact that Donald Trump claimed to not know anything about this meeting and then was like, oh, look over there, JD, right, is odd in and of itself. And if there were multiple cabinet officials supposed to be at the meeting, not just Pam Bondi, not just JD Vance, that raises questions about like who else might be there, right? Who else would be included in that mess? And, I'm not expecting it would be like Linda McMahon, who, by the way, got like booed and had her sound system hacked at an event yesterday where circus music got played. It's hilarious. You should go find the video. But nonetheless, it's not going to include like the Trump hardcore loyalists, but it raises some kind of questions, right? Like, what is J.D. Vance doing meeting with other people under the purview of the Epstein scandal who sit on the cabinet? Why is he doing that, if that's actually accurate? Because it doesn't make any sense that, for instance, you would have, say, like Howard Lutnick there, right? And I'm not saying that was what the reporting was, but there are other people in the cabinet who would have no legitimate reason to be involved in a conversation like that. And so all I want to say about this is it's something to watch. Again, speculation, speculation, speculation. I'm not the only one to be talking about it, but I will just say this. It's odd. Like, it's kind of a little odd, like a little hinky, like my kind of like, I don't know, intuition is a little off about this one, right? So again, I just have to say that Trump is not doing what anybody would recommend in this situation. I mean, I have to laugh about this because there are advisors behind the scene that are saying something like, just stop talking about Epstein. Why do you have to talk about Epstein all the time? Just don't talk about him anymore. And then he gets in front of the press and somebody asks an Epstein question and he's like, it's all a Democratic plant and it's all bullshit, which is, he literally said yesterday, this whole thing is made up by Obama, all this like nonsense, right? Nonsense. Because he can't stop talking about it because he knows his goose is cooked if the files are released. So we shall see. But I mean, the good news is that as it's moving along, it's not diminishing. It's not doing the thing that usually happens with Trump scandals. Like this one is not going away. And so we're going to have to see what happens next. But I will just tell you, there's some like kind of fairly serious red flags being raised right now about like at the bare minimum, serious nervousness in senior leadership in the administration about what is potentially or already known to be in those files, because Pam Bondi knows what's in those files. Kash Patel knows what's in those files. The two of them have been at each other's heads, right? Like Kash Patel's furious that the Epstein files aren't being released, or at least that was the reporting 2 weeks ago. So all of this is very, very odd. Okay, I had a bunch of questions on the Patreon feed today. By the way, please don't forget, if you enjoy what we're doing here, to go over to patreon.com/resistancelive and become a paid subscriber for as little as $5 a month. You get to ask me questions, you get bonus broadcasts, there's other perks, and it's a great community. So head on over there and do that. And by the way, don't forget to subscribe to the channel here. But there were some questions on the Patreon feed this morning about Trump making these comments about JD Vance being his heir apparent. Okay. In an interview that was conducted of Donald Trump 3 months ago, he was asked this exact same question. He was like, nope. Do you consider JD Vance to be the heir to the MAGA movement? No. He actually said that. And so I always have to, whenever things like this come up, where, he's asked who he thinks is in his line of succession, so to speak, for the cult, I always have to kind of like think about the whim of the moment of Donald Trump's brain. Because JD Vance was like standing next to him, right? Very different thing from when he's like not in the room. And the other thing that I think everybody has to kind of keep in mind here, which I feel like I've said hundreds of times on this broadcast in the last few months, but is worth repeating, cults do not cling together when the cult leader is gone, okay? One of the things that we've been talking about here quite a bit is that the MAGA coalition is fracturing, and possibly fracturing like beyond all repair right now over the Epstein files cover-up. And if Trump, for some reason, is no longer in office, let's just say he like resigns due to quote unquote medical reasons, as some of the speculation, including mine, has been down the road, okay? It is highly unlikely that JD Vance, who nobody likes, but like the tech bros, that JD Vance is going to be able to hold this coalition together. He is a Ivy League educated, hedge fund backed 41-year-old man married to an Indian woman with brown children. There's no way that he is going to be able to hold together the MAGA coalition. Like, not a chance. Not a chance. Like, he's everything that they claim to despise. And he lacks the kind of like populist gaslighting nonsense that Trump is able to spew ad nauseum because he's a narcissistic sociopath. So I don't think that there's any kind of, I don't think there's anything to worry about, frankly, in terms of JD Vance being able to hold a coalition together. Now, if JD Vance is in power, is he a scary figure? Yes, because Peter Thiel is a fascist and Curtis Yarvin is like a really major fascist, and they're all the way in on those folks, okay? If they have power, they will execute it consistent with their fascist aims. But are people going to like it? I don't think so. And I think it's going to be very difficult for JD Vance to pull together any kind of support that Donald Trump has had because of his weirdly appealing capacity to bring out the worst in people. Like, JD Vance is just a slime ball. That's different from like an ideologue and, an autocrat. So again, I think there's a lot to consider here about like why Trump would make such a statement, but also I don't think it matters. I mean, I think it's in its own right kind of irrelevant. Okay, so leaving all of that aside, just like one final note for today that I think is really critical in the context of where we're at. I feel like I mention this now regularly on every broadcast, but I really want people to be very cautious right now about where you're getting your news. And I said this yesterday from a different angle, but it's worth saying it today again because of a couple questions that I got asked this morning also. You have to be really, really careful about what you believe to be true on the basis of what you see on social media, because there are people who are reliable and then there are people who aren't. And if you're seeing something that is in the form of a meme or a GIF and you're like not sure where it's sourced from, and there's no attached reporting from a mainstream news reporter or a reliable independent journalist, you should have very significant doubt about like whether or not it's true. And I've seen things like this kind of like spin out recently in various ways that play upon people's already existing fears about things like ICE, right? Which is bad enough as it is, okay? But I've had some moments recently where I worry that it's not getting through because I continue to get asked questions where I'm like, there is no reliable sourcing for that whatsoever. Like, you plug it into a Google search bar and you're going to know that. So again, and point being made in the chat right now, which is very valuable. It's not just about politics. It's actually about everything. You have to be really cautious right now because apart from anything else, the United States is in a real moment of crisis, obviously. And one of the things about bad actors is they exploit crises with disinformation. And so you should assume, unless you know you're getting it from a reliable source and you've checked that source, that what you're being fed is designed to influence you in particular ways. Like full stop. I know that may sound like a very broad statement, but it's true. And you should do your best to not regurgitate things without knowing whether or not they are true. Okay. Because you will become part of the engine that drives disinformation if you're not careful about it. So I just wanted to issue a word of warning about that because I'm seeing it pop up more and more. And also I have this sense that, as I said yesterday, some of you are sharing a household with Fox News viewers. Some of you are getting information from friends and Facebook memes without back checking its reliability. And this is just a moment where you can't do that because you become part of the problem if you farm that out to others. Okay. So please like back check what you're reading, like back check it seriously and make sure that you are not getting unnecessarily upset and not also relying on false information. Okay. All right. I'm here tomorrow, regular time. I am here tomorrow afternoon for our Patreon subscribers for our regular bonus broadcast. And then I am off all of next week. So there will be an educational video on Monday that will drop on our Ripple Effect Institute channel, our sister channel, which is always linked below in the show notes, by the way. And other than that, I will not be here next week at all because we are on vacation. The whole staff, everybody in our team is on vacation. So I will be here, as I said, tomorrow. I will look forward to seeing you all then. But next week will be our annual little summer break. And I hope you all take a pause next week. I'm going to do my best to kind of like not be online as much as I can be. It still sucks me in, as I know it does for everyone, but I'm going to try. All right. Don't forget to subscribe, thumbs up this broadcast, drop me a comment if you're watching after the fact. Make sure that you are sharing this broadcast with your friends. And if you like what you see here, please do consider becoming a subscriber over on Patreon. It's a great community. Lots of good perks over there. We have bonuses coming up for our Patreon subscribers beyond what we already offer in the next few weeks. More are coming on that as we hack some back end things that need to go into place before we can do that. But please head on over there. All right. I'll see you all here live tomorrow. Enjoy the rest of your Thursday. All right. Bye.